Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with redemption, moral lessons, and love are told. Today, I want to share a story that began with despair in the heart of a billionaire and the unexpected voice of a homeless man who reminded him of what he had forgotten. Sit back, listen carefully, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as we go deeper into this journey. I was standing just outside the grand glass doors of aerospace headquarters in Lagos, my bare feet aching against the hot pavement. The world bustled around me, people in fine suits moving swiftly, cars honking impatiently, and yet I stood still, invisible to them all. My clothes were torn, my beard unkempt, and my face wore the marks of sleepless nights on street corners. I had nothing but a battered satchel that carried a notebook filled with scribbles no one cared about. Yet inside me burned a knowledge I thought the world had buried when it cast me aside. Through the doors I could see him, Cyril Nagy, the billionaire CEO, whose name dominated newspapers and whose face gleamed on magazine covers. Today, however, his expression wasn't one of power but of despair. His shoulders slumped as he leaned over a conference table surrounded by men and women in suits. Their eyes shifted nervously between laptops and sheets of paper. The room was silent, save for the occasional frustrated groan from Cyril that I had overheard whispers on the street for weeks. Aerospace, the pride of Nigeria's aviation industry, was drowning in crisis. Their autopilot system, the very technology meant to guarantee safety, had failed repeatedly during tests. Aircraft jerked in midair, controls fought against pilots, and investors threatened to withdraw. The media smelled blood. One more failure, and the company would collapse. I watched through the glass as Cyril rose to his feet, slamming his palm against the table. His voice trembled. Billions invested, some of the best minds in Africa and abroad, and none of you can tell me why these aircraft behave like they want to kill their pilots. What am I paying you for? An engineer cleared his throat, muttering about complex software interactions and environmental variables. Cyril's face reddened. I don't want excuses. I want a solution. Do you hear me? A solution. I don't know what pushed me, but my feet began moving. I slipped past the receptionist who tried to block me, her face twisted in disgust at my smell and appearance. Sir, you can't go in there, she hissed, but I pressed forward until I stood inside the conference room, every eye glaring at me with shock and disdain. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a man in a navy blue suit, probably the head of security, growled, "Who let this tramp in here? Get him out before he spreads disease." But Cyril, his eyes wet with unshed tears, raised his hand. Wait. His gaze fell on me, curious, yet desperate. What do you want? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I can correct it, I whispered. The room erupted with laughter. The engineers chuckled behind their hands, one of them sneering, "Look at him. He probably can't even spell autopilot." Others shook their heads, muttering about the humiliation of their time being wasted. But Cyril's eyes stayed on me. He walked around the table slowly until he stood just a few feet away, his expensive cologne mixing strangely with my own stench. His voice dropped low. "What did you say?" I said I can correct it. I repeated, stronger this time. "Your system doesn't have a software bug. It has a listening problem. The sensors don't agree with one another. They lie, and your autopilot believes whichever screams the loudest. But the sky doesn't forgive liars." A hush fell over the room. The laughter died. Cyril blinked. "Explain." I pulled out my old notebook from the satchel. Pages filled with equations, diagrams, and annotations tumbled into the light. My fingers trembled, but my mind was steady. I quickly drew 3 sensors, each capable of drift, each prone to noise. Your engineers built algorithms that assume sensors are kings, but kings can go mad. You need checks, a filter that ignores spikes and cross-checks data from siblings. Don't trust one alone. Trust balance. Give the pilot back the ability to override before the autopilot panics. One of the senior engineers, a tall man with glasses, scoffed. "Ridiculous. We've tested every Kalman filter variation known to man." "No," I said softly. "You complicated it. You drowned the truth in equations. What you need is simply to let each sensor doubt the other. Then teach the system humility." Cyril leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as if he saw something familiar in me. Then he turned to his staff. "Run it." The room buzzed with protest. "Sir, this man is unqualified," said one. "This is absurd," said another. But Cyril slammed his hand again. I said, "Run it." They dragged my scribbles to the simulator reluctantly, fingers typing with skepticism. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the hum of processors and the click of keyboards. I stood silently, my heart pounding, my life hanging on the edge of code I had written in desperation years ago. Then the graph shifted. The red spikes that once tore through the charts now smoothed. The violent jerks that plagued the system calmed into graceful arcs. One of the engineers leaned forward, his mouth falling open. It's stable," he whispered. Another tried again with turbulent scenarios. The system held. Crosswinds are still steady. The engine surge autopilot corrected gently. One by one, their protests turned into stunned silence. Cyril exhaled sharply, tears escaping at last. He turned back to me, his face unreadable. "What's your name?" I hesitated. "Daniel Okafor." "Daniel," he said, his voice breaking, "you just saved aerospace." The room erupted not in applause, but in murmurs of disbelief and grudging respect. Yet I could feel the hostility burning from one corner. A man named Emeka Chidubem, the company's lead engineer, glared at me as though I had stolen his soul. His jaw clenched, his fists balled, and I knew then that I had just made a powerful enemy. But at that moment, none of it mattered. For the first time in years, someone looked at me not as trash, not as a failure, but as a man who could still make a difference. And that look lit a spark inside me that I thought had died forever. After that day inside aerospace headquarters, my life did not change instantly the way people love to imagine. Yes, Cyril Naji had looked at me with gratitude in his eyes, and yes, my correction saved their failing project, but suspicion still hung heavy in the air. The engineers whispered that I was a fraud, a lucky beggar who had stumbled on a guess. That happened to work. Security still eyed me as though I might pocket a calculator or steal a laptop. Even when Cyril offered me a chair in his office that evening, my own heart trembled, for I carried a past too heavy to reveal. Cyril poured himself a glass of water, his hands shaking. He didn't sit behind his wide desk like a king on a throne. He stood by the window, looking down at the glittering Lagos night. "Daniel," he said finally, his voice quieter than I expected, "you walked in today looking like you've been forgotten by the world. But what you gave me," he paused, turning back toward me, his eyes glistening. "You gave me hope again. I need to know who you really are." The words weighed on me. For years, I had buried my name, my achievements, my shame. But here was a man who demanded the truth. I pulled my satchel closer, fingers brushing over the tattered edges of the documents I had carried like a coffin on my back. Slowly, I opened it and laid them on his desk. A degree in aeronautical engineering from Purdue University. Letters of recognition from a U.S. aviation board. Newspaper clippings that once celebrated me as a rising star. And beneath them, the papers that destroyed me. Court documents, a deportation order, and a faded photo of a family I had lost. "I was once someone," I said, my voice breaking. "I had a wife named Patricia and a daughter named Emma. I worked in the States designing stabilization systems for aircraft. They said I was a genius. I thought life had chosen me to shine." My throat closed. I swallowed hard before I could go on. But the person I loved most betrayed me. Patricia fell in love with another man, one of my colleagues. To rid herself of me, she planted cocaine in our apartment and called the police. I woke up one morning with my daughter crying, only to be dragged away in handcuffs while my wife stood watching. Cyril's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I spent 3 years in prison for a crime I did not commit. By the time I came out, Patricia had married the man and told the courts I was unfit to see Emma. I fought, but my voice was too small. One night, I was stopped by immigration officials. They told me my visa had been revoked. They sent me back to Nigeria with nothing but that satchel. The silence between us grew thick. I could hear the hum of the city outside, the faint rhythm of traffic below. My chest heaved as the memories clawed at me. For years, I slept under bridges, behind churches, anywhere I could. I begged for scraps. And the whole time, I held onto my notebook, telling myself I was still Daniel Okafor, the engineer, even when the world only saw a beggar. Cyril came closer, his eyes softer now. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "The world may have forgotten, but you didn't forget. Yourself. That is why you could save me today." Those words pierced me deeper than any insult I had heard in the streets. I lowered my head, tears running freely. The next morning, Cyril made his decision. He summoned his board, despite their protests, and declared that I would be hired not as an errand boy, not as a consultant, but as chief systems advisor for aerospace's autopilot division. The shock that swept across the room was like an earthquake. Some called it madness. Emeka Chidubem in particular looked ready to explode. His voice dripped with venom. "Sir, with all due respect, you cannot place our future in the hands of a street man who appeared from nowhere. This company is not a charity." Cyril's voice thundered in reply. "This company is mine, and I will decide whose hands can carry it." Daniel earned that place when he solved what all of you could not. That was how I stepped into a new life, though not without scars. Every day, I walked into aerospace headquarters, dressed in the clothes Cyril bought for me, feeling the stares prick my skin like needles. Some whispered behind my back, some mocked my accent, others sabotaged my work to make me fail. But my mind, once caged by despair, had found freedom again. I buried myself in data, refining my design, testing it against storms, surges, and failures. And each test proved my worth more than words ever could. In time, even the doubters began to quiet. Pilots who tested the new system came back with reports of smoother flights, fewer alarms, and better trust between man and machine. Contracts that had been slipping through aerospace's fingers returned. Investors who once threatened to withdraw now applauded. And through it all, Cyril stood by me like a brother, defending me against every storm. But not everyone celebrated. Emeka's resentment grew darker. He watched as my ideas replaced his, as Cyril sought my counsel more than his. I caught him glaring at me across rooms, his lips curled in quiet hatred. Once, he cornered me in the parking lot, his voice low and poisonous. "You think you've won because Naji pities you? This company was mine to lead, and you will regret taking what belongs to me." I said nothing. I simply walked away, though my stomach churned with unease. Amidst this, something unexpected bloomed. Her name was Amara, one of the company accountants. She was soft-spoken, with eyes that saw deeper than appearances. Unlike others, she did not treat me like an outsider. She brought me tea when she noticed I worked late, asked me about my diagrams with genuine curiosity, and listened when I spoke about planes the way others would about poetry. Slowly, her kindness melted the walls I had built around my heart. For the first time since Patricia's betrayal, I allowed myself to smile again, to imagine that perhaps love was not forever poisoned. Weeks turned into months, and the shadows of my past began to feel less heavy. My name appeared again in journals, this time linked to innovation, not disgrace. When Cyril invited me to his home for dinner, his children called me Uncle Daniel, and I felt something stir, something like family. But with every step forward, Emeka's anger sharpened into something dangerous. He began missing meetings, whispering with outsiders, his eyes always fixed on me with a promise of vengeance. And deep down, I knew that the redemption I had begun to taste would not come without blood and fire testing it once again. Life at aerospace felt like a rebirth, yet beneath the celebration there pulsed a storm that no one but I could sense. For every applause I received at conferences, every handshake from officials congratulating me on stabilizing the autopilot system, there was Emeka, lurking with a quiet rage that grew sharper each day. I could feel it in the way he avoided speaking to me in meetings, in how his eyes burned when Cyril praised me, and in the subtle sabotage attempts, misfiled reports, deleted code, delayed test schedules. But no matter what he did, truth had a way of pushing through, and my work kept proving itself stronger. Amara was my refuge. When the pressure in the office became suffocating, I would find her gentle laughter waiting to lift me. We began to meet outside of work at small cafes tucked into corners of Lagos, at art galleries where she showed me her love for paintings, and even at beaches where the waves drowned out our worries. She asked about my past, and though it pained me, I told her everything. My betrayal, my prison years, my deportation. She held my hand through the story, tears falling as though my wounds were hers. Then she whispered, "You are not defined by what was done to you. You are defined by what you choose to do next." Her words stayed with me. They gave me strength. One evening, as the sun fell like fire behind the skyline, I asked her to be my wife. Her eyes widened, then softened, and she said yes. For the first time in so long, I dared to dream of a future built not on pain, but on love. Cyril celebrated the news like a proud father. "Daniel," he said, raising a glass, "you walked into my office as a man broken by the world, and now you rise with everything restored. This is what I call victory." But victories invite enemies, and mine was already plotting in the shadows. It began with whispers. Anonymous notes slid under my office door warning me to step back before it's too late. Strange men loitered near my street at night, disappearing whenever I approached. Amara grew nervous, urging me to tell Cyril, but I didn't want to bring more trouble. I thought it was nothing more than intimidation. Until the night it became blood. It was 2 weeks before our wedding. I was leaving the office late, carrying a folder of flight test results, when I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Its engine idled though no one came out. My stomach tightened, but I told myself I was imagining things. Then as I turned the corner, footsteps echoed behind me, fast, deliberate. "Daniel Okafor." A voice hissed. Before I could turn, pain exploded in my side. A knife. My vision blurred as I staggered, the folder spilling across the pavement. 2 men loomed above me, masks covering their faces. "You should have stayed under the bridge where you belong," one growled, raising the blade again. At that moment, I thought it was the end. But headlights suddenly flooded the street, and a horn blared. The attackers fled as a car screeched to a halt. Cyril himself jumped out, shouting my name, pulling me into his arms as blood soaked through my shirt. "Hold on, Daniel. Don't you dare leave me now." I woke in a hospital bed with Amara at my side, her face pale with fear, but her hand warm on mine. Cyril stood near the door, his expression hard, angrier than I had ever seen. "It was Emeka," he said flatly. "We caught one of them. He confessed. Emeka paid for your death." The police moved swiftly. Emeka was arrested, his face plastered across the news as cameras captured him shouting curses at me. "You'll never be safe," he screamed as officers dragged him away. "Even from prison, I will make sure you fall." He was sentenced to 20 years, his empire of pride crumbling into dust. But his words lingered like a shadow, and sometimes at night, I could still hear them. The wedding went ahead despite the scars still fresh on my body. Amara walked toward me in white, her smile brighter than any pain I had endured. As we exchanged vows, I felt the years of loss, betrayal, and suffering dissolve into something new, something whole. Tears blurred my vision, but this time they were not from despair. They were from gratitude. Cyril stood as my best man, his speech simple yet powerful. "Daniel reminds us all that greatness can rise from the gutter, that the world can break you but never erase your gift. And to those who envy, let this be a warning: light cannot be buried by darkness." The applause that followed filled the hall, but even in that joy, I held on to vigilance. Emeka was in prison, yes, but his threats still crawled in my mind. Life had taught me that peace was fragile, and enemies had a way of reaching beyond walls. Still, as I looked at Amara, her fingers wrapped in mine, I knew one thing with certainty: I had found my redemption. Homelessness had not killed me, betrayal had not destroyed me, and even knives had failed to silence me. I was Daniel Okafor, an engineer, a husband, and a man reborn. And though the shadows of yesterday might follow me, I had something now I never had before: faith in myself, love that healed, and the strength to face whatever storms the skies might bring. Moral lesson. Dear friends, this story carries a lesson that burns deep into the heart. I was cast aside, forgotten, and despised. Yet it was in that pit of rejection that my true strength was tested. We must never measure a person by their present appearance, for hidden beneath rags can be brilliance the world desperately needs. Envy may plot, betrayal may cut, and falsehood may imprison, but the truth of who you are cannot be stolen. What saved me was not only knowledge but also resilience, the refusal to surrender when life demanded I bow. And love, oh, love is the balm that makes scars bearable. Amara's kindness taught me that broken hearts can be mended, that even after fire, the ground can grow flowers again. As you listen, remember, no matter how low you fall, your gift remains inside you, waiting for its moment. So, my dear viewers, hold tight to hope, believe in your hidden worth, and let no enemy convince you that you are finished. Your story is not over. If you found meaning in this tale, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and drop your lessons in the comments below.